Two mothers whose kids went to the same kindergarten gradually became friends. However, this friendship would evolve into a case of mind control, abuse, fraud, captivity, and even death. So let's talk about today's sponsor, GlassesUSA.com. Glasses are expensive, and now I don't wear glasses, but I do wear quite a bit of sunglasses, and I go through a lot of the cheap pairs, to be honest, so I never end up looking quite as good as I probably could. But with GlassesUSA.com, you've got a load of different options to look through so that you can find something that looks good on you. By cutting out the middleman, GlassesUSA.com offers over 10,000 prescription glasses and sunglasses, including in-house brands like Muse and Amelia E, and designer brands like Ray-Ban, Oakley, Gucci, and many more. At up to 70% off of retail prices, too. GlassesUSA.com even has a virtual try-on tool on the website which really helps you find the right pair. I used it to find mine and it was super helpful. So here's the pairs I ended up getting. This first one is the Revel Tour de France, clear and blue. Looks pretty good. Then I've got these, the Otto Aucus brown turquoise gold. Then last year I have the Otto Octavius gunmetal, and these are definitely cool looking too. But I'd say that these right here probably look the best on me and kind of fit the style I usually go for. So maybe you're feeling overwhelmed by the amount of choices. Well, there's actually a quiz on the website that you can take that'll help you find the right kind of glasses for you. Well, what if you don't even want glasses? Well, they've got you covered there because they sell contacts too, and you get 25% off of all contacts lens brands, Vista Plus, AccuView, Biofinity, and many, many more. So go ahead and check out the GlassesUSA.com link that I've got put down in the description below to get pretty good deals and find some good glasses that look great on you. Thanks again to GlassesUSA.com for sponsoring this video, and now let's get on to the content. Two mothers whose kids went to the same kindergarten gradually became friends. However, this friendship would evolve into a case of mind control, abuse, fraud, captivity, and even death. Today we have the case of Rie Ikari, a 39-year-old mother and her friend, and I use that word very lightly, Emiko Akahori, a 48-year-old woman. This all went down in Sasaguri Town, a town out in Fukuoka in Japan. This is a case that involves abuse, mind control, fraud, you name it. Let's start at the beginning of this bizarre case, when the two women first met. In 2016, two women, Rie Ikari and Emiko Akahori, were taking their children to the same kindergarten. Rie was known by those around her for being a warm, affectionate person, strong and dependable, despite being pretty naive and fairly easy to take advantage of. A man who sometimes worked alongside her at her place of work said, "She was a good kid. I could be joking, tell an obvious lie, and she would immediately believe it. I think she was too honest. Maybe this was easy to control." Given that Rie didn't really have many friends, especially when it came to this kindergarten, Emiko decided to invite her to a small circle of other moms who would get together and talk sometimes. Little did Rie know, Emiko was pretty well known amongst these mothers at the school for being a pathological liar, spreading all sorts of rumors and making all sorts of false claims. In fact, her entire identity was a forgery. She used a fake name when mingling at the school, and she even used heavy makeup to make herself look as young as possible, telling everyone around her that she was 34 years old when in reality she was 44 at the time. Although she came off as fairly pleasant to those she had just met, her real personality was anything but. She often used her age to try to force younger school employees into doing extra work for her and her kids, and often adopted a rude and arrogant manner of speaking while doing so. Emiko had been born in a small town to a family that would become somewhat infamous. Those who grew up around her have gone on to say there weren't many people around who thought well of that family. Her father lost his job and burned through the savings he had set aside for her while she was still very young. Her parents called up everyone in their neighborhood begging them for money, and they were able to get a pretty solid amount out of them. However, they paid back nearly none of them, and one day they up and moved away in the middle of the night. From her time as an elementary school student onwards, it said that Emiko had a bright personality but was very arrogant. She would often brag about how expensive her clothes and accessories were to the other students in the class in order to get some respect out of them. She was of a bigger build and was a bit intimidating to the other girls around her. She often used this to assert dominance over the other girls and even ordered them to go buy food for her from time to time. In high school, she would go on to bully any of the students who slighted her in the least. In her 20s, she quickly quit her job selling snacks and cut all contact with her parents, disappearing into the night just as they had done years ago. After that, she got married, had kids, built a family, built up a large debt, and ran away again. The debt she had against her was high even back then, around 3,400,000 yen, roughly 25,000 US dollars, and it's likely she only kept borrowing and failing to pay back money even after that. Granted, that's pure speculation, but I think it's pretty safe to say. Rie and Emiko had somewhat of a friendship over the next 2 years, until when, eventually, Emiko decided that she wanted Rie all to herself. After inviting Rie to join her New Age religion, Soka Gakkai, she started to feel as somewhat of a leader to her, establishing a pecking order between the two and definitely putting Emiko at a higher social standing than her, in her mind at least. She started telling Rie that the other moms in the group were talking about her behind her back, repeatedly drilling into her head, "The other moms are saying horrible things about you," until she believed it. Her claims didn't stop there, though. She escalated. Being that the previous claims seemed to have worked, she decided that she wouldn't stop at ruining Rie's relationships with her friends. She started telling her that her husband was cheating on her as well. Of course, there was no truth to this, but she made her claims believable enough and repeated them so often that Rie came to actually believe them. "I'm the only person you can trust," she told her, over and over again. In May of 2019, Rie couldn't take the suspicions anymore and divorced her husband, unable to trust him any longer. She moved into a small apartment in Sasaguri town with her 3 sons and soon started receiving child support as well as welfare. In November, Rie's family became a topic of interest at the local child welfare center and they began supporting the family as well. Emiko saw that money was now coming in for the family and quickly began trying to get her hands on as much of it as she could. Under the guise of helping Rie out, she started telling her that she needed more and more money to investigate her husband's cheating as well as to pay for court costs, drilling it into her head that, "You need to win this court case with your ex-husband and start living a normal, simple life with your kids." Despite her seeming interest in the well-being of the kids, she started filling Rie's mind with ideas about them as well, saying things like, "Your son is going to throw sand at some other kid and get you sued," when the boys were out playing. She gradually started to limit the kids' activities and become more strict with them as well, controlling basically everything they did. Eventually, Emiko started making grand claims that, if she were able to help, she could easily get the divorce case settled outside of court. She even stated that she had Yakuza connections who could take care of the problem in a heartbeat if she simply asked them to. She kept raising the stakes and upping the ante so much that Rie felt that she was constantly under some sort of threat, when in reality nothing was happening at all. All of these threats were purely in her imagination. Emiko started saying that she would help the family save money by drafting up a budget for them and putting a certain percentage of their funds every month into a savings account. But in reality, as you can assume, that money was going straight into her pockets, adding up to more than 10 million yen over time. It started with Rie simply withdrawing her automated payments at the ATM and handing it over to Emiko, but over time, Emiko was given complete control over her bank account. It didn't even end here though, as she also had various flea market app accounts and credit cards taken out in Rie's name as well. Emiko used this money to live large, blowing huge amounts of money at pachinko slots, going on family vacations, and buying all the high-brand goods that she wanted. Wanting to squeeze every drop of money out of Rie that she possibly could, Emiko started getting stricter with the family's budget, eventually going as far as limiting how much they were allowed to spend on food by a substantial amount. The amount they were able to eat got smaller and smaller over time, with Emiko usually deciding on what meals they could eat herself. Rie became so desperate for a little bit of extra money that she made hundreds of calls to people she knew, begging them for any amount of money they were willing to give, convinced that she was completely broke. Although she saw Emiko as her dependable friend who could solve all of her problems, she started living in constant fear of being watched and monitored, eventually to the point where it took all she had just to get through one day. Eventually, Rie's family became so poor that her electricity and gas were cut off, and her family started going to the local convenience store to use their internet. Emiko began limiting their food to simply a small bit of rice, bread, and various little packaged snacks. There were times when their food budget would run completely dry and they would go more than a week at a time without anything other than water. Emiko told her, "Don't give any food to a kid who won't listen to what you say." She fed into her paranoia by adding, "The boss is always watching through dozens of surveillance cameras." The boss is what she had started calling all of the other moms back from the kindergarten group, who hadn't actually had anything to do with her for well over a year at this point. "You don't want to make them angry, so go on living that simple life," she told her. If Rie didn't go along with what Emiko told her, she would punish her by forcing her to stand outside for long periods of time, by hitting her, or by not allowing her to sleep. By March of 2020, Rie had fallen so behind on rent payments that she was given no choice but to move. By now, the boys in her family were getting so weak from stress and malnutrition that their internal organs were starting to fail. Usually, the oldest son was given about one small bowl of rice to eat from, the youngest was given about half a bowl, and the middle son was given somewhere in between. That was when they got to eat at all, however, as there were many days where they weren't given any food at all, sometimes for several days in a row, in fact. Emiko would tell Rie, "The kids were getting fat, so you were denied your payments this month. Remember, they're watching you through the cameras. You need to be more strict with the kids." If the kids were ever to leave or eat without permission, they were to be confined in a closet and even beaten. The youngest son, Shoshiro, while at school, would tell the other kids that he got to eat a lot the night before, but spent the class time drawing pictures of food. This was until in November when he started a vacation from school. Eventually, he was taken out of school and stopped going entirely. This was none other than Emiko's idea, of course, as she feared that any questioning of his weak physical state might lead to an investigation in which her fraud and abuse would undoubtedly be discovered. Eventually, Shoshiro became unable to walk. Rie was understandably worried, but Emiko assured her that he was only faking it, or that he'd just feel better if he slept it off. He voiced that he was worried about his condition, but needless to say, he wasn't given proper care. He began complaining that his head hurt and asking if he could go to the hospital. His eyes began to lose focus and he started spacing out entirely. But Rie felt that she needed Emiko's permission before she could actually do anything. On April 18th of 2020, Shoshiro finally succumbed to his hunger and starved to death in his home. At the time of his death, he only weighed 10 kilograms. He hadn't been given anything besides water in the past 10 days leading up to this. Even then, Emiko was right there, saying, he's fine, as the boy was being taken to the hospital, following the family along every step of the way. Obviously, given the way the boy died and seeing that his weight was less than half of what would have been normal for his age and height, the police opened up an investigation pretty quickly. They found that Child Welfare Services had actually been called to visit Rie's family on multiple occasions after multiple reports that her son was getting thinner and weaker over time. Despite going to the house about 16 times, they only actually met with the child about 5 of those times, given that Emiko was always there to get in the way and kind of impede any sort of investigation that they attempted to do. By June, it seemed that Rie had finally realized that Emiko had fabricated all of the problems she thought she had. A few months later that year, in December, Emiko was arrested on suspicion of fraud. It was because it was believed that, under mind control, she had been controlling Rie for such a long period of time that she was able to swindle her out of increasingly larger and larger sums of money over an extended time period, having complete control over the family and often abusing them in the process. Investigations by the police gradually came to reveal what we know now, that Emiko Akahori had gradually taken complete control over Rie Ikari's family. They learned about her strict budgeting, the lack of food expenses in that budget, and her control over Rie's bank book, which obviously was very out of the ordinary. The police couldn't really come up with any explanation for all of this control being given to Emiko aside from mind control. They thought that Emiko must have gradually chipped away at Rie's mind until she would follow her instructions completely without any resistance, believing everything she said without a shadow of a doubt. About a year later, on March 3rd of 2021, Shoshiro's mother, Rie, along with Emiko, were both arrested on charges of death resulting from abandonment of a dependent. By this point, it seemed that Rie had finally fully realized the extent of Emiko's control over her and the extent of what she herself had done. Her entire family was torn apart, and one of them even lost their life, all because she chose to trust this vile person. She now has nothing but regret. I regret that I ever trusted Emiko. I regret that I've given my children such bad memories to live with. And of course, I regret that I lost the thing most important to me. Rie's lawyer argued that she should serve a suspended sentence for what she did, meaning that she wouldn't actually serve any jail time unless she committed another crime, because of the extent of which she was being manipulated. But just last month, on June 17th of 2022, Rie Ikari was sentenced to serve 5 years in prison. The judge stated that there wasn't really any mind control taking place aside from Emiko repeating her lies over and over, and that Rie shouldn't have believed them without evidence in the first place. Emiko was a witness at her trial, but due to her own upcoming trial regarding the case, she wasn't able to say much. A date for her next hearing is still pending as of the writing of this video. We'll just have to wait and see what kind of sentence she gets in the end. So, once again, thank you for watching my video. If you like content like this, feel free to give it a like, as it really helps out with the algorithm, and if you find content like this interesting, do feel free to subscribe, as I talk about it pretty often. This week I have some fan art to show as well, this coming from Abby Blackbird. I really do appreciate it, and if you have any fan art you'd like to send in and have me show on here, feel free to do so. And if you don't mind, go ahead and add me on social media too. I mean, you know how YouTube is. If anything were to ever happen to this channel, that would probably be the only way you'd ever hear about it. If you want to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon, which I keep linked down in the description below. And speaking of which, shout out to the top patrons. We have got Entreprenant, Grack, El Palmieri, Salad, Kevin, AMCMT, Rick of Work in Progress USA, Tang, Sash Johnson, Marianne McCurdy, Buttery Frankus, Wafrans, Jules Latona, Arctic Cat, Alan Damiani, Adrian Lawley, Marsh, Buffa Zerk, Rinsenstein, Kim Peak, Lux Alpaca, Charity, Scoochie Main, Jackie, and Mark Barnett. You guys are godly. And don't forget to check out the link for GlassesUSA.com down in the description below. So this has been your host, Kyle, signing off. Bye bye.